Great. So I first want to thank everybody for joining us today for the Habitat House Party. Extremely excited for this opportunity and for this group to talk about advocating for affordable housing today. So thank everybody here. We have Monique, Kyle, and Malik, who will definitely talk to you a little bit more about what they do. But first, wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. So if you have not done so already, we strongly encourage you to follow us on our social media, Habitat New York City, Habitat NYC, and donate to the organization. Every dollar counts. And with that said, I first want to kick it over to Monique and say what's up and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Carole, how are you doing? Thanks for having me. I wanted to just quickly introduce myself. My journey with Habitat started at Afropunk, and we had an Earn a Ticket program where folks could earn a free ticket to our festival by volunteering with different organizations. And that was my introduction to Habitat because they were our partner for many years. And so we were able to bring folks into building with Habitat. And more recently, I assisted with some training sessions on the census earlier this year, right before COVID hit. And since then, I officially have joined as Hype NYC's advocacy chair and have been working on our arts and advocacy campaign. And it's been great to be working with Hype NYC and Habitat on these various initiatives. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I just wanted because I was so excited to get to Monique, I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Carole Lewis, and I am the Director of Advocacy here for Habitat New York City. And what that means is I generally engage with all of our government officials from the city level and to the state level and engage our communities to ensure that communities for Habitat, we are not building in communities, but we're building with communities. So we are really important that we are looking at advocacy as it is part of our mission, not just building, but uniting New Yorkers around the cause of affordable housing. With that said, if you don't know, we are joined by a political celebrity. So that is Kyle and Malik, and I'll let them talk a little bit more about their podcast. And just for awareness, the podcast and Habitat are two separate entities, and Habitat is a nonpartisan organization. We do not get involved in any political, campaigns. We really just advocate no matter who is in office. But if you listen to the podcast, you definitely know that is not where Kyle and Malik are. But I'll leave that up to them to talk a little bit more about the podcast.
Yeah, so we are certainly not nonpartisan over at the House Party Podcast. Good morning, Carole. Good morning, Monique. Good to see you all. Thank you for having us. My name is Kyle Ishmael. Malik, always good to see you, my dear friend and co-host.
Hi, how are you? Oh, this is Malik Wright. Hi. Do our names pop up at the bottom? As though anybody's going to respond back to me, but yeah. Hi, everyone.
That's there. Yeah.
Hey.
So, so as Carole said, Malik and I are co-hosts of House Party. It's a podcast on New York politics. We touch on federal politics. We touch on city politics as well as state. It's a good time. It's fun. It's irreverent. We use our experiences working in government and working in politics to comment on everything from, the guy in the White House to the guy in Albany to the guy in Gracie Mansion. We do it usually with a drink in hand. We bring guests on the show.
A little early today, but ordinarily.
A little early today, but
ordinarily. It's 12 o'clock somewhere.
All right, a little Bailey's in the coffee, a little champagne in the orange
juice.
Juice.
Some.
There's always time in the morning for something. But that's who we are, and we appreciate you guys bringing us on.
Absolutely. So with that said, you talked a little bit more about talking about your experiences in government. Can you, Kyle and Malik, tell a little bit about your own personal experience of how you was able to start the podcast, how you got to that point, and what's your background in, politics and government?
I'll start with that one. So, as far as when we started the podcast, we had been talking about this. Kyle and I have known each other for years and years, but we have been talking about this podcast maybe a few years ago. And because obviously anytime you're like, oh, I should start a podcast. And we were like, let's talk about it. Because anytime you're with your friends and you're shit talking and you're talking about politics and what's going on in the world, you're like, people should hear us talk about this. And so that was kind of our energy. And, it started off as an idea, a really kind of a kind of trip into what would it be like if other young political types, especially because a vast majority, and people don't always know this, vast majority of how government runs, right? You see your elected officials. You don't see the 15 people working behind them. You don't see all the staffers, all the interns, everybody who's working their ass off. And many of them, especially in New York City, are Black and brown people. And so we
never sleep, Blake. They never sleep.
Who never sleep. And we have media outlets that weren't necessarily speaking to them and to us. So we just said, hey, let's do it. Let's have our friends on the show. Our friends happen to be, Congress people and senators and so on. But
elected officials and advocates.
Yeah,
and,
but advocates and groups.
Dope
but
people in this space.
Yeah, but people have very real conversations without giving a shit about, what's anybody going to think, because that's not how we talk when we're all sitting around together. So that was really the background of the show for us. And as far as my background is, I worked for a few years at the Attorney General's office, New York State Attorney General's office. And then from there, I went over to work at HPD. And all of this is like in strategic roles. And then ultimately went to be Director of Legislative Affairs for Jumaane Williams, and then a policy advisor to Gail Brewer, and then something new coming up soon, as well as being political director of the Manhattan Democratic Party.
So the something.
And president of the Manhattan Young Democrats for a second. I forgot about that time.
That's it. Just a little here and there, but I'm not going to leave you alone as it relates to your HPD experience and talking about affordable housing. So I'm definitely going to poke you on that. But Kyle, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer by trade. I went to law school, came out, eager young lawyer, hit the Bronx family courts, and from there really kind of just fell into family law. It's one of those fields that I think it's definitely the most personal type of law, right? Like you're touching on people's day to day and their family and their children and all of that. And I think like through that lens, doing that work, I saw how every issue touches family law, right? Like you may be going to court for child support, but it's directly related to your job. It's directly related to your education. It's directly related to, do you have housing at the time? And so there's so many services that are wrapped around, what you're in family court for. And so doing that for a few years, I wanted to kind of expand, and I ended up working for the city at the Office of Child Support Enforcement at HRA, and running their programs, running their child support programs in order to try to get more financial resources for the child, but to also work with parents, especially non-custodial parents who are supposed to be paying this child support, to be in a better position to be able to pay their child support, right? So connecting them to employment so that they could be able to pay their child support, finding ways and programs for them to be able to take care of arrears and any debts that they may had. And helping them to find connections to housing. We worked with a lot of nonprofit groups to be able to connect people to housing and jobs. So, all those services are really connected. And that really expanded my horizons as well in terms of how all these things are connected. And then from there, I ended up getting connected to an assembly member, Nick Perry from Brooklyn. He had recently become the chair of the Caucus and was like, hey, I need an executive director. And that was 5 years ago. And 5 years later, here I am, still as the executive director of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, Asian Legislative Caucus. It's a lot of people, a lot of names. And it's basically a group of elected officials.
Of the legislature.
Right.
Of the legislature. Of the entire, basically, Black and brown people, the caucus is the legislature.
All the Black, right. All the Black and brown people.
I joke with Kyle all the time, Monique, and Malik and Monique. That's going to confuse me for the rest of the day.
Yeah, Eminem.
But I joke with Kyle all the time that that's a lot of bosses also and a lot of personalities.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
The secret, I think the secret to it is like, because I have so many bosses and because they know I have so many bosses, I can sometimes like ignore one of them or ignore them strategically and be like, oh, well, yeah, but so-and-so needed me for this. And, but yeah, obviously in the state legislature, we work on tons of substantive issues, from housing to education to health. And, like Malik said, taking all that experience and everything, all the connections that I've built up over the years, and realizing that, we had a particular mindset, we had a particular view of the world, a particular way of moving about in this space. And we found that it was really endearing to our colleagues, to our coworkers, to our friends. And we turned that idea, of sitting around and chatting with friends about this world of government and politics, and actually turned it into a real show. And it's been a great experience ever since these last 2 years.
Yeah,
great.
Thank you for that. I definitely did not know all of the hats you both wore. And so thank you so much for the work that you guys have been doing and continue to do.
Low key, we've gotten more low key. We do a lot more through House Party than like all of the multiple hats. Like I've actually had more success with the podcast than I had like being president of the Young Dems.
I would say until the podcast pays my bills, I won't say the same. But it's definitely one of the more enjoyable aspects of my day.
You guys are staying very booked and busy. And so both of you explain a lot of the government work you've done, and you've created this podcast that also keeps you busy. How do you guys balance the two? You guys are in so many different spaces and plugged into so many different spaces. How do you balance the two?
For one, I'd say it obviously helps that, I think the various hats that we wear are related, right? Like it's government, it's politics. An organization may be non-political, but they still understand that politics is what gets people into the room. So if you're an entity that's dealing with just whoever you happen to find in the room, that's fine. But there is a process by which those people get in the room, and that's politics. While my day job might be working in the room in the legislature, my other job as co-host of the podcast is talking about it all. I didn't even mention that I'm the executive director of the Manhattan Democratic Party. So there's that political hat as well, right? So helping to play a role in who gets into those rooms as well. So like I said, it definitely helps that all these things are related. And then you throw the podcast on top of that, and then it's just I get to talk about all the things that I'm doing,
And I think Kyle and I we've been able to really figure out a way to do both things well. One, because I think he and I balance each other out really well. So, we are able to have really good conversations, really deep conversations, very raw and irreverent conversations. But we always we're kind of, it's sort of magnets that are able to we're able to keep each other in line in a way that makes the show entertaining, that makes it smart, that makes it cut there just enough that even the people who we're talking about are like, yeah, they're right. It's can't even get mad at them. And so I think for us, that is helpful. And like Kyle said, yeah, that it kind of is, you're kind of living, breathing. And I've told people this, I'm like, politics and you guys know this, advocacy, once you're in it, it becomes sort of a lifestyle, right? Like your friends, your people who you're hanging out with on a regular basis, your boss, everybody is sort of interconnected. And if we can in any way, shape or form, find a way to streamline how we're living, we figure it out.
Yeah, that's dope. I have to say that I've been listening to your podcast, and you guys have definitely found a balance between bringing fun to politics. And you mentioned, having your cocktail in your hand, usually while you're recording. And how important is it to kind of light the Baileys, with the lightweight approach to politics, especially during this time?
Well, I mean, I'll pick up on that last part, right? I think that obviously the pandemic hit, early March, I guess, and or really like, rose to the point where everybody was like, yeah, we're gonna have to hunker down and change some things in our daily lives. And I for one was literally in Albany, and making my way back and expecting to go back to Albany as I generally do on a weekly basis that following week. And then we got the order and was like, yep, nope, lockdown, everyone's staying home. And I think initially, we did maybe a couple episodes of the podcast, but then obviously it became, difficult, really untenable, given that, Daddy Cuomo was like, nope, stay in your homes. I think part of the energy that really flows so well for Malik and I is that, we're together, right? Like we're in the room together, we're in the studio together, we're at the bar together, wherever we're having these conversations, but we're feeding off of each other. He's cracking jokes and I'm cracking jokes on him. I'm saying stuff and he's cracking jokes on me. Like, it's the give and take. Yeah, keep him muted. Keep him muted. I don't want to hear what he has to say. But it's a flow. And so doing that not in a physical space together was a little difficult. And so we had to take a little hiatus, right? And especially because this pandemic is heavy. It's real. It's, people are getting sick out here. We've lost over 225,000 people, I believe, at this point, upwards of 7 million people plus who have, contracted the virus. And so it's a real thing, right? And so we had to obviously be mindful about our own safety, the safety of others around us. But also because the show is so fun, right? We're not looking to make light of a very serious issue. But we had to make sure that once we came back that we were discussing it in a context that matched with the show, but also met our listeners, where they are. And that's how we had to, to really find a way to connect it to the politics that was going on the ground, right? Like, how are our leaders responding to this pandemic? What does the shape of the presidential race and all these other electoral races happening around the country, what does it look like in light of, the pandemic? We did a whole episode on just the impact. Obviously, we've had all the protests and everything going on this year as well, right? So the impact that has on the Black community, especially, obviously being two Black men, we have a lot to say about it. So we touch on the heavy issues as well, but we continue to do it in our voice.
So I love that because I think you really touched on the virus that have shut down. At least New York City did it right. God knows what the rest of our beloved states across the country is doing. But New York City, we shut down. And before this happened, we were in a housing crisis. And what brought us together today is to advocate for affordable housing. And as we were just saying, like, all of the Black and brown legislators are Kyle's bosses, and Malik is fully involved in the politics of New York City and New York State. And Monique, you are engaging with a lot of young professionals who either were hit hard or understand the importance of affordable housing. I asked all three of y'all to really talk about what you see the next vision is for affordable housing after this crisis. For me personally, it really hurt my heart when the governor and the mayor's mandates was to stay at home, and the hardship being that where you live is not always home for people. And we started to see that especially in the summer. We know that there are a lot of young people that in New York City in the winter, they sleep on people's couches, but in the summer, those families pretty much put them out. And they are pretty much in the city just roaming around, especially, LGBT people or queer people, right? Like, those people definitely have issues as it relates to housing insecurity, especially when they're young. So that really hurt my heart when the governor and the mayor just kept saying, oh, shelter at home. And I'm like, well, that's easier said than done, but I think it really ripped off the scab for this country that housing insecurity is real and we are not doing housing right. So I asked all three of y'all to, talk a little bit about how you envision this going forward with the affordability crisis, where we were before and where we are now. I'll start with Malik since Kyle was already talking.
Oh, I mean, that's mean, that's a big question, and I think you hit on a lot of key points. Some of the main work I've been doing has been in the education space, and one of the key pieces that was talked about a little bit in the early phases of this lockdown, but that I think is underreported, is the fact that when we talk about connectivity, Wi-Fi, when we talk about having a roof over your head, when we talk about the fact that sometimes, like you said, home isn't home. Sometimes it's a fucking traumatic place and it's not a good place to learn. It's not a good place to grow. But we're all living together. And then you add onto the additional stress that comes from the fact that now people are unemployed. Now people can't pay their rent. Kids sometimes, like you said, work during the summer. Sometimes kids were bringing home some money for their household with summer jobs, summer youth employment, wherever they could work at a Starbucks or something, as well as trying to go to school and trying to better themselves. And all of that just sort of stopped. And I think that's the real cost that I think when, living in a city like New York City, and anybody who's in this space politically, policy-wise, I think we really find ourselves. I think this particular situation that we face, especially when it comes to how we live and how we learn, how we are together, and how we're all locked down, I think it really, for me, was eye-opening to the sense that we all have a responsibility to make some real radical moves to see some change take place at all levels. And that's why I always ask myself, I'm like, at this point, I've reached a point when it comes to, canceling rent, when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to education, where it's like, what's the most ridiculous idea? And then let's see if we can synthesize it down to something that can work. But no more of this, no more of these little things, because this pandemic hit us, and it really equalized a lot of things for a lot of people, where it was like, yo, the basic shit, our house, the roof over our head, can become a life and death proposition. And so I think that's where I stand on really making sure that we build this politics, government, advocacy in some very radical ways to solve these problems.
Love it. Monique?
Yeah, I mean, Malik, you said it very well. For me, COVID definitely had me rethink what home meant. And also what we should all have the right to. And of course, in an ideal world, we should all have the right to shelter, to food, and to access to things that provide us our survival, right? The basic levels of needs. And where we all have been affected by this in such a way where we're starting to question our government and the systems in place and what they should be giving us, right? What should not be negotiable. And I'm also thinking about, yes, kids that are displaced, people that are displaced, but also domestic violence folks, as well as children who are at home in unsafe environments. And so much of the various activities that would normally have they no longer have access to, and how detrimental that can be on someone's mental health, and so on and so forth. And in an ideal world, of course, we want people to have basic needs. And I think we've been able to rethink what our government, what policy should look like in relation to that. And I've been working with artists in particular through our arts and advocacy campaign. And I used to be in arts and entertainment. And so much of my friends have been affected by the gig economy, right? We are used to hustling for that next gig, getting that paycheck for that next gig. And now we don't have access to any of that. We can't be in large spaces with people physically. And so much of arts and entertainment has had to rethink how they're approaching those things as well. And because of that, a lot of people, of course, are unemployed. And so it's just really definitely had me rethink what I want my future to look like, career-wise, but also, questioning a lot about what our government should be providing us. I don't know if there's a right answer necessarily, and I know there's a lot of red tape that comes with politics, so I can hope and wish a lot of different things, but things take time. And I think the one thing that has been hopeful is already the numbers of folks who are out here voting. And we've already seen such a shift in us taking and staking a claim in what we want to see. So that's hopeful to me.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly here. I think, I love what Carole said about, a house is not necessarily a home for everybody. An apartment is not necessarily a home for everybody. And so it's easy to tell everyone hunker down at home and you'll be safe. But, as Monique said, there are people who, they're facing domestic violence at home. They're facing other types of abuse at home. They are facing food insecurity at home, and maybe their best meal of the day or possibly only meal of the day is when they go to school, or if they go to work or something like that. So while, yes, it's important for us to remain, physically distant during this virus until we have a vaccine that we can trust and that works, as was said, the virus has just laid bare so many ills of society that so many advocates have been pushing leaders on. And again, this is a nonpartisan thing, right? Like pushing Democrats, pushing Republicans, on doing better by our people with regards to housing, with regards to education, with regards to health. All these things are related. The foundation of your life should be a home, right? Like somewhere where you can go, where you can be safe. I'm blessed and privileged to be able to have a home that is my peace, that I feel safe in. I work from home often when things were back in the normal times. I traveled to Albany. I did work from home. I had my office downtown as well. So it's an extreme version of what I normally do, but I know that I am comfortable and I'm safe and I have what I need at home. But not everybody's in that space. And so I think, to Malik and Monique's point, to not belabor it too much, there are basic needs that we all agree people need, and we all consistently say people need, right? Like you need food, you need shelter, you need clothing. But why do we not ensure that our policies match those needs, right? Like if we all agree that everybody needs housing, why is it not guaranteed? Why, to Malik's point, let's think of the most ridiculous way, the most radical way that we can ensure that everybody has housing, and then let's figure out how to get there, right? Like, and not like, well, let's create a little program here or create a little program there. Let's
tinker around the edges here and there.
Let's tinker over here, right? Let's completely, if we have to restructure everything to make sure that everybody has what they need, then let's do it. And what's the problem with that, right? Because again, given my experience, given my professional experience, all the things that I laid out earlier and all the spaces that I've been in and worked in, I've seen how all of these things are related. I've seen how, having a homeless parent, a parent who's experiencing homelessness can mean that they don't have a job, or that they're not able to vote, or that they're not able to receive certain government services. And so that prevents you from being able to take care of your child, which now puts that child at a disadvantage when they're going to school, right? Like they don't have the resources, even the intangible resources, of course, the love, the care, the presence of one of their parents, but the financial resources and everything else that brings, to a child that's able to benefit from two parents. And so we see the kind of trickle down of these issues. And so if we can solve them, like we would be a much better society. And I think that we all need to be putting our efforts towards that.
And I hope that I think this was supposed to be the young professionals panel, but I hope everybody that is young professionals and non-young professionals is watching to really, hear that there are experts and advocates that can really push policies forward. But, Malik is pretty much saying, like, listen, like, let's push whatever anybody can think of and throw it at the legislator and throw it at, the politicians and see what happens. And, I really hope that that is something that is heard, that half of the time or a lot of the time they don't have a lot of the positions. And I want to bring that up because that's sometimes scary. I remember, Monique, we did a young professionals Zoom, and a lot of young professionals was pretty much saying, yeah, but I'm really scared of really getting into elected politics and overall because, that's just not me, right? I am whatever my professional career is, I'm not in that space. So, I really ask again, Carole and Malik to talk about that because you have the podcast and I, like y'all, are deeply involved in politics. We all share pretty much the same friends, and some of them like family. But like, how do we start to reach those people that are professionals, not just the people that are, have no interest in politics, but they are concerned that if they get involved in it, they're going to be seen as an outsider, or they're going to be seen as someone that do not know what they're talking about. How do you connect with those people?
So I'll just say this. I always give two answers to that question, right? Well, first answer is to anybody who's just in general, especially younger people, like Gen Z folks, like who are out here talking about, people ask the question, why should they be involved in politics? One, they are more involved in politics than people give them credit for. But two, at the end of the day, especially if you're Black or brown, you're a person of color, if you're living in this country, ultimately we are going to inherit this country. Come hell or high motherfucking water. We are going to, like, just natural, just progression of how things work. We're going to get back what our ancestors put into it at some point. And if that's the case, then it's our responsibility to make sure that whatever we end up receiving, whatever our trust fund ends up being, that it's kept together. And a part of that is making sure that you're engaged in the body politic, because what's happening is people are destroying they're fucking up housing policy. They're destroying your environment. They're making choices that are going to affect your healthcare, and making choices that are going to affect your education and education of your children one day and your grandchildren. And so white folk, they really do engage like that. Like, they know that politics is a generational thing. And so a lot of times I talk to, especially like young people of color, I'm like, this is like, think about this country as the country as your birthright. And if that's the case, and the things that your ancestors had to do in order to inherit it one day, for you to inherit this one day, or your children inherit it one day, make sure you vote. Make sure we don't have white supremacists in office, even though I also argue that a lot of that is put on us, when in reality, there's other people who are responsible for that. Now, alternatively, to young professionals who are smart and engaged in this, but they're afraid of what people are going to think about them, who cares? Like, if you want to get involved, get involved. Don't worry about people. Like, I was very much that way. Like, I was in government. I was around the edges of government. For a long time, and politics for me just seemed daunting. One, because I'm very blunt, and I always understood that a lot of politicians are like they double speak and they talk slow and they don't always get out the exact truth. And I get straight. I literally just can't. My brain can't not just get straight to the truth. So I never thought there was really a space for me. So I was like, let me keep my head down, make sure I keep a job so I don't get fired for saying something wrong in a political space. And ultimately, I decided that I can't do that anymore. And thanks to, Kyle was really instrumental.
Yeah, I wasn't going to let him, just post along like that either. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kyle was very instrumental in ensuring that, I made sure to get involved in some way, shape, or form. So I guess arguably find a Sherpa, like find somebody who is in it a little bit and who can help you. You guys can go to events together. He and I would go to like holiday parties and meetings and stuff together. And, eventually you sort of like you fit in and you find your space and you find your people. But don't let being worried about sounding dumb or not being involved or people questioning you stop you from taking your hands and getting them really involved in what your future looks like.
Investing in your inheritance and find a Kyle is pretty much what you say.
Well, find somebody else. Kyle's mine.
That's usually the solution. Find you a me.
Yeah, you're not busy enough.
Yeah,
right, exactly. I will also just quickly add to that as well that there are like a million different needs in this space, whether it's government, whether it's politics, and there are skills. There truly are. I feel like it's become a bit of a cliche, like a resume builder thing. Oh, transferable skills and all that. But it really is a real thing, right? Like, I mean, Monica's work in arts and entertainment, that is absolutely a space that like can merge so well with government and politics. And there are people who have found, I mean, look, our president is a reality entertainer, right? Like, so not saying to necessarily model that, trying to maintain the guidelines here, but like there are absolutely skills that transfer to this world, right? So, even if you are somebody whose work who works in the corporate field, or somebody who works in entertainment, or whatever space that you occupy and whatever skills you have, even if it's not necessarily your profession, but it's personal skills that you've developed. There's a way to bring that into this field. And I think the other thing too is, given there are so many organizations that have popped up, so many collectives that have formed in the past 4 years even, to kind of respond to where our country has been moving. There are a million different ways to get involved, locally, nationally, even just joining an organization that, maybe is national. And so maybe there aren't like local meetings or anything, but you're staying informed. There's opportunities to come together at conferences. There's opportunities to learn from others. Find what your interest is. Like Malik said, find you a me, right? Like find you a friend who is doing something, and join them in it. Whether it's going to Habitat for Humanity and volunteering to work on a house, on a dwelling, on a residence, and meeting people who are actively engaged in just community work. You will meet people, and that will broaden your network and your opportunity to change the community around you.
Monique, did you want to talk a little bit about managing your young professionals on your board and their expectations of what we are advocating for and what advocacy looks like in
this new world? First, I want to say just like imposter syndrome is very real, especially among people of color. And I experience that on the daily. And it's something that you just kind of have to practice until you mentioned to yourself, like, I belong in this space, what voice I have, it matters. And it takes some practice. And some of that is, going to an event, whether virtual or not, with a friend and plugging yourself in these spaces and understanding the dynamics at hand and getting familiar with it. You guys mentioned playing to your strengths, and arts and entertainment is a world that I've been in for the last 5 years. And so when I was asked to join that Hype's board, I was just really focusing on that, how I can incorporate my strengths in my network. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of artists around our Get Hype series, where we're essentially just trying to find the soundtrack of affordable housing, right? Every month we're working with a different artist to curate a playlist, and it's just one entry point into the world of Hype NYC and, of course, Habitat. And it can seem something that is not directly related, but again, trying to meet people where they are, right? So maybe it's not a webinar. Maybe it's not something that's virtual. Maybe it's not Instagram. Maybe it is just this playlist. I really dig this artist and I'm plugging into, what they're working on an advocacy front. And I find that all folks that I've worked with find affordable housing to be an important issue. And so the artists that I've been fortunate to work with think that it's important. They want to be a part of this series. They want to be involved. They've been attending our webinars and trying to be involved as well. And the word has been pivot for a lot of organizations, and there's so many ways to plug in. It can seem overwhelming and daunting because there is so many ways to plug in, but people are doing trainings, right? People are saying, hey, you don't know how to organize? Come join this conversation. We can teach you. People want to mentor. In many ways, the folks that I've been working with are someone I can work to learn from, rather. And so people want to see you succeed, and people are creating the path for you to succeed if you express your interest, if you let them know what you want to be involved in. So play to your strengths. Hype NYC's board is definitely very diverse in terms of people's backgrounds. And when I was first joining the board, I was really interested to hear all of the different backgrounds that people were coming from, because I didn't know. I was like, okay, well, you're from, real estate, you're an architect, you're into finance, and how they're able to use their network and their expertise to further the mission of Habitat NYC. And so that's a formula that you can use anywhere if you want to be involved.
Love that. So I think we're coming close to the end of our time, and greatly appreciated this time with everybody. But I just wanted to, Malik, if you want to start to close us out, and I'll do a roundabout to everybody to close us out, and then make sure we shout out the podcast and where we can hear it.
How do you want me to close your app? What does that look like? What does that look like?
Any wise words from Malik Wright for everybody listening, and then we'll get around to everybody else.
Oh, okay. So I think key piece here is, for me, I've always thought about the idea of advocacy, about politics, government, all of it as a way to give something back. I love politics. I really do. I love it. Like down to it just gets my energy. It just gets my energy a little higher each time. And so I can say that by also saying that I don't want it to be something where it's purely political. You should always be having a central kind of feeling of some kind of change that you want to bring. So I always say, like, look, if I talk to you and we can't have a real conversation about something that you get so mad about, that you absolutely can't, you'll risk it all, especially when it comes to something about helping people. So for me, it's around criminal justice, it's around housing, it's around education. Those are the things where I get really upset, and I'll get into a whole argument with you about.
He will curse you out. You
I don't care
and your mama.
I don't care who you are. I don't care how powerful you are. If you show me that you have a lack of fucks to give for people who are incarcerated, children who are struggling with their education, people who are housing insecure, then we're going to have a problem. And for me, that's what motivates my love for politics. So I think, going back to what you were discussing before, I think if we really think about how we can get involved in any significant way, just make sure you're coming from a place where you're centered on something. And I think that's how you're going to really be able to make some change, because you're being really intentional about how you move in this space. And so I think that's something that I always want to impart upon people when they ask me about just what we do and about the podcast. The podcast for me is a way to hang out with my friend and like talk shit. But also it's a way for us to make some change and talk about things in a way that we don't always get the ability to talk about it, and call people out when they need to be called out, and advocate for things when we need to advocate for things. We are extremely, outside of, talk about, not even about partisanship, we believe in things. Like, we will advocate for workers. Like, we advocated in the early parts of this early days of the podcast, we were advocating for a union for legislative workers and for city council staffers. And this was like before any of the things that ended up happened. And they, this is something that we then fought. We were at rallies with folks, we're going to folks, and we were going to use this platform for something. So anything you do, anywhere you're in, whatever space you're in, use that platform, make it effective, and do shit that you care about, honestly.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean, no. Well, you know what? I want to make sure that we touch a little more on the work that Carole and Monique are doing, and that Habitat is doing, and the young professionals. Obviously, I mean, as we talked about our backgrounds, Malik's worked in HPD. He's had a little more substantive experience with regards to housing. I consider myself a jack of all trades, right? Like, I think my true expertise is family law. But having worked in the legislature, having worked in city government, federal government, I'm a bit of a strategist, right? And I help people to get to where they need to be. So I'm a little more interested to hear, and I'll do my closing statements and all of that, but like, I want to kind of turn the mic over, especially to Carole, but also to Monique, to hear a little bit more about like some of the work, especially here in New York City, some of the advocacy work and activities that Habitat is doing, especially in light of the pandemic, right? Like the entire world is flipped on its head. And so I'm sure that obviously the ways in which you guys approach the work, but also the substantive work, I'm sure has changed as well. So I'm kind of curious as to what that looks like on your end.
Yeah. So I'll say my piece, and then flip it over to Monique about what the young professions have been doing. But since about March, I have been really deep dive into a very exciting policy in New York City, which is the tax lien. And what that is for everybody that is, watching, and if you don't know, in New York City, if you are a homeowner, that owes any municipal debt to the city. That could be water or whatever debt you owe to the city can sell your lien. They put a lien on your home, and they sell it to a third party entity. And this was created by the amazing mayor Rudy Giuliani. And I tell everybody in the city that I don't think we should run on anything that Mayor Rudy Giuliani is still doing. So as Kyle sips his tea. So it is unabashedly racist. It's unabashedly affects people, Black and brown communities more than any other communities in the city. And we should get rid of it. And we have been part of a coalition since March, consistently calling for the tax lien to be not postponed, although the mayor consistently postponed it, but to be canceled. Because people are, as we were saying all day, people are in a pandemic. They should not be thinking about, oh my God, I'm going to lose my house because New York City sold my lien to Wall Street. So Wall Street can now put $15,000 extra on my $1,000 lien that I own the city. And now I'm losing my house for $20,000, $30,000. And where am I going to go from there? It makes absolutely no sense. So, we have been really in the trenches as it relates to that. We've been able to galvanize support with a lot of Kyle's members and a state legislator who pushed the governor to sign an executive order, pushed the mayor because there's one person that has full authority over this program, and that's the mayor. And the mayor could have canceled it and did whatever he wanted, and he consistently kept postponing it, which only gives a greater insecurity in people's gut of, will my lien be sold next month? So we've been really in the trenches on that policy. And I'll be seeing Kyle in Albany start in January on all the other policies that we are going to be really preaching and talking about with the state legislator. And before I kick it over to Monique,
hopefully we'll each other hopefully we're allowed out of our homes and we can go to Albany.
Governor Cuomo opens us back up again.
Daddy Cuomo says we can. Then, we're good.
But with that, the Advocacy that we've really been, talking about on a state level is what I call my baby bill, which shout out to Assemblywoman Latrice Walker and Senator Jamal Bailey, which is the Affordable Housing Corporation bill, which on the state level, there is only one program for home ownership. And if you are building home ownership in New York State, you're able to access up to $40,000 per unit. But if you're building rental in New York State, the state will give you up to $110,000. And in my opinion, that is also racist. And I'm not calling the governor and I'm not calling the state legislator racist. It's a policy that was created decades ago that it ensures that developers only build rental in Black and brown communities. And then we see the vast gentrification because we are not owners of the communities of which we live. So when the state legislator comes back around, hopefully we will take care of the tax lien on the city side, but on the state side, we really need to see a greater investment in home ownership policy and home ownership investment.
Cool. Thank you, Carole, for all the work that you've been doing. I mentioned earlier our Get Hyped series where I've been working with different local artists to curate different playlists. And that's one way that Hype NYC has been reaching out in terms of advocacy. And externally, we have our webinars that we've been doing every single month since April, since COVID. And it's been great to have a variety of conversations and to have panels like this one where we're talking about important issues. It's not last month. I don't know what time is, but earlier this month, we had a conversation around voting, right? And so we've been able to at least have strategic conversations that's relevant to our community right now and giving them resources and tangible ways to plug in. And then internally, we've been pushing the envelope with ourselves and our committees and submitting proposals and asking Habitat NYC for certain things and supporting Habitat NYC. And even the gala is an extension of that. We've done a lot of work in cultivating and curating these next 2 days. We've also internally have been making sure we're continuing the dialogue around COVID, around housing, around other issues as well. And one of those things has been through our advocacy channel that we have just simply on Slack, right? Plugging in and giving in people articles to read, to stay informed. Yes, affordable housing is a main issue, but there's so many other intersections, right? So whether that's police reform, whether that's conversations on voting, or the census, and more, there's so many other things that we need to continue to stay abreast about. And so that's kind of a little bit about what we've been doing. We've also been trying to party with a purpose. And so I'm always about providing a fun element to our webinars. And so we've had the opportunity to do a couple of after parties to some of our more intense conversations that we've had this year. And we are doing another celebration at the end of this year as well to thank our board for all of the amazing work that they've been doing. More recently, we're given a grant because of the work that Hype NYC has been doing, and we're hoping to use that for our MOK event in January. So there's a lot of things that are to come, and it's been great to kind of cultivate this space where everyone is really using their strengths to the larger mission of Habitat and supporting the various initiatives. So, yeah.
And Monique, if anybody's watching that is not a Hype member but want to engage, can you tell them how they can get engaged with Hype and also even work with you on the advocacy committee?
Sure. My email. Well, you can definitely look up my LinkedIn, which I think it's somewhere in this fancy website that we got going on here. Feel free to send me a message because I'm always plugged into LinkedIn, and I'm always needing help and want to work and collaborate with people. Our playlist is on Spotify, so check out Hype NYC. We've been doing this since April, so there's a lot to work with. It can be your soundtrack as you're getting work done from home. Yeah, that's how you can plug in. Oh, you can also become a member, with Hype. It's really easy. You get access to our monthly events. Some of them are professional trainings. So you get access to Habitat members, our boards, our CEOs. They're very involved in Hype NYC and our mission, so they're always visitors when it comes to our webinar. And it's only $15 a month, and you get to put your money where your mouth is in supporting affordable housing directly. And that's also on Habitat's website to become a young professional.
Great. Kyle?
Yeah, so I mean, I will kind of close my remarks, and I think it's been mentioned a little bit, but one thing that Malik and I do at the start of every recording of our show is set our intentions, right? We talk about what is, obviously we do a very in-depth editorial about what we're going to discuss, and we have meetings and all of that, and we prep. I don't know how we do it in between all the other things that we do, but we also make sure that we set our intentions before we get going. And I think that that's something that, I think at first I was like, all right, let's just get going. Like, why are we adding one more thing to what we have to do here? But it's become a habit, and it's become, a religion within our process, and it's become very necessary. And I think that it helps to shape just the flow of the conversation, but I've also seen how it helps to shape the flow of everything else that I do, right? Like if I, as I set about the world to do the work that I'm doing, whatever I'm doing on that particular day, whatever project that I may be lending my energy to, I'm very purposeful about taking a moment to ask myself, what do I want to get out of this, right? And so I think that you do that in your daily lives, but I think if you do it very intentionally in all the other spaces that you're taking up, it's helpful, right? So for people looking to get involved, for people looking to better their community, to better their own lives, if you take a moment to pause and say, what am I looking to get out of this? I'm going to put my energy into this thing. What am I looking to get out of it? That will help to get you to where it is that you ultimately want to be, because you've taken the time to identify what it is that you're looking to get out of something. So like I said, we do that for the podcast. It sounds like, Hype and Habitat are very intentional about the work that they're doing in the community. I know that there are folks watching this who are obviously engaged in this work. And so I would just encourage people to take that moment to really set their intentions for what it is that they're putting their energy into. Like I said, we do it for the podcast. I'm gonna plug it one more time. House Party. You can go to housepart.ny.com. We are also on Spotify. We're on all the different places where you can get your podcast. If you're an Apple person, all the things. We're everywhere. But yeah, my lasting remarks would just be to everybody to be very intentional and to take a moment to set those intentions and to just remind yourself why you're doing something and what you want out of it.
Great. Well, I want to thank Monique, Carole, and Malik for participating in our advocating for affordable housing today. One, I want to tell everybody, I know all four of us will agree, vote. Go, you can early vote. There is literally, many ways that you can, participate in the election next week, but go out and vote. Second is, similar to what Malik said, if your takeaway, if anything, is invest in our inheritance. Find a cow, not cow, find a cow.
Not this one.
Not that
Although,
cow.
If I can help out in any way, I will.
Because that's Malik. That's Malik's cow.
Yeah, he's used up.
Washed up, used up.
Look at he's like no more energy left. He wakes up like, I gotta see this guy again.
And then, as I stated from the beginning, please donate to the organization. Every dollar counts. Follow us on social. Follow Monique, Malik, Carole on social. Follow me on social. And follow the podcast, which is, a separate entity on social. And last thing I would want to say is our CEO, Karen Haycox, will be going live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. Feel free to, check in on that. And over the next 2 nights, look up to the Empire State Building. One of those nights will be lit up in Habitat colors. So thank you for participating, and we look forward to engaging you.